Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to another running session / show and tell. So today's video idea comes from YouTube user Munim's Favourites, and it's a video idea that I absolutely loved. I thought when he suggested this, I thought yes, I've got to do that. So very simply the idea was to show every different livery you've managed to collect. Now I thought I'd be able to do that quite easily. I thought yes, I'm going to get one of each livery, stick them in the sidings, and that will be that. It'll be quite easy to do. Well, once again, I'm not sure how, but I've managed to completely definitely underestimate, the number of different liveries out there. I don't know what I was expecting. I perhaps thought there'd be a couple from each of the big four, maybe a small handful of BR liveries, and then perhaps 5 or 10 of the different pre-grouping loco liveries that I've managed to collect over the years. Well, no, it turns out there are an awful lot of liveries. I'd never thought of this before, but even if you take Great Western Green, for example, it sounds simple, but when you actually start to look, there are so many variations of Great Western Green you wouldn't believe. So, unfortunately, my plan to get every single variation of every single livery that I own in my collection and put them all into the sidings has fallen through. I can't really do that. So, what I've decided to do, first of all, to keep the numbers down, is to just limit it to British steam. To start with, I was going to include diesels and electrics and worldwide engines as well, but there's just far too many, and frankly, I don't have enough siding space for that. So I'm going to do it that way, and also I'm going to thin it out a little bit. So for example, when you get Great Western Green, there are quite a lot of different variations, so I'm just going to include a few, and I think LNER Green was a bit like that as well. Loads of different variations of LNER Green, but when it comes to liveries like that, where there are lots of variations, I'm just going to include a couple so that it's not dull. Obviously, if I was doing this for science, I'd need to get them all, but the idea of this is entertainment. This is supposed to be enjoyable to watch, and showing you 20 different Great Western and LNER engines, which are just very slightly different, I don't think would be very interesting. And also not very interesting is hearing me ramble on like this, so let's get to it. We're going to start with some Southern Region locos, and we'll start taking a look at some of these liveries. So fingers crossed this will be interesting. I hope it doesn't go on for too long, but hopefully you'll enjoy it. Okay, let's give it a try. Okay, so let's crack on then with this mammoth journey, and I reckon this is going to start to show some of the gaps in my knowledge. Well, I say gaps, it's probably more like great voids that you can fall into and never return from. But yes, Southern Green is going to be a tricky one because there's obviously quite a few different shades of green that are used. I think I've got a fair idea of what they're called, but almost certainly I'm going to get it wrong. So let's give this a try. So at the front here we have an N15, a King Arthur class. I think that is olive green, is that right? I don't think it's Maunsell Green. I could be wrong though. I think it's one or the other. And I would have said this is Maunsell Green, but again, I think I could be wrong there. But either way, that's a much sort of, is it a lighter shade of green, I suppose? It's difficult to compare them, isn't it? But yeah, hopefully you can see the difference there. Obviously, this one's a little bit easier because black is black. So there we have the S15, which is in the, well, it's just Southern Black, I think it is. Then we have not a loco from the Southern Railway, but it looks a bit like the Southern Railway, and it is Southern Region at least. So that is the EKR Green. I think that's East Kent Railway, which is pretty cool. Then we've got the Terrier, which I'm not really sure. I mean, I always thought this was Umber, but clearly it's not LBSC Umber because that's what we've got behind, which you'll see in just a second. It doesn't really look like Improved Engine Green either, so either my mind has failed me or I never really knew the name of that livery. So interesting, I'm not 100% sure, I do apologise for that, but I've included it anyway. And then of course behind that we do have the LBSC sort of Umber Brown livery, which is clearly quite different, and that is of course the H1. Is that right? Yes, it's the H1, that's it, yeah. Very, very beautiful, that. And then still with the Southern Region, we have the SECR, a couple of SECR liveries here. We have the SECR Green at the front, I absolutely love that, that's the Hornby H class of course. And then SECR Grey behind it, which is the Hattons P class there. Once again, a very, very interesting and very lovely looking livery. Then we have Southampton Docks Brown with the LSWR, I think it was. Yes, I think it was. That's the B4 from Dapple in quite a nice brown. And then I've put this with the Southern Region stuff because, of course, I think it would be London Transport, which is quite a nice maroon livery, quite different from the rest of the Southern Region liveries. So now I have a few miscellaneous liveries. I thought I'd start off with those and get those over with quite early. So we have, oh blimey, what's this one? We've got the Oxford N7 here. Yeah, it's in some sort of grey. Let's just take a guess at NER. Was it the NER grey? I might be wrong there. If it is wrong, I will put a text correction on the screen right now for you. Then we have an LMR blue, which is the Longmoor Military Railway with the USA dock tank there. Yes, I think at least I've got that one right. Behind that, a fictional livery. That's the Great North and South Railway from the Railway Children. So you've got the pannier tank there in that livery. Behind there, goodness only knows what we'd call this livery if it's got a name other than yellow with black lining. It is, of course, Stephenson's Rocket, perfectly unique as far as I'm aware in my collection. Then we have the leaf green of the Peckett just behind there. Again, I don't know if it's got any other special name apart from leaf green, but that's that. Then behind there we have, I think is it military green or something like that? There was a name that people let me know for this one. It's Molly anyway, the Model Rail Sentinel. It's a sort of greyish, greenish colour. War Department anyway, but once again, yes, a livery unlike any other as far as I'm concerned, at least in my collection. Okay, so let's get on to my nemesis then, which is of course a Great Western. So let me just get into position and I'll show you some of those. So you really will have to pardon my ignorance with some of these, if you will. So first of all, we have Great Western Black. That's reasonably easy. I think that's the only loco I've got that's in Great Western Black, which is quite interesting. Then we have the first of the Great Western Green, which is very lovely. I would call that one early Great Western Green. That's pre-grouping era Great Western, I believe. Which is lined, obviously. Then we've got another Great Western lined green. The first one was the Hall, by the way. This one is the County. And I think this one is slightly later. As you can see, the lettering on the tender is a little bit different with the Great Western Shield on there. So, yeah, again, I'm not 100% sure of the name of that livery, but it is obviously different to the previous one. Then we have yet another Great Western Green. The shade of green is definitely different on this one, I would say, and it's got what I think you would call the shirt button logo on the tender there. If that's incorrect, again, let me know. I'm not infallible in these things, but once again, unlined green, so it's clearly a different livery to the previous one, and that is the Earl class, or the Duke Dog. Yes, that's it. Okay, around the beam. Sorry about that. If anyone's motion sick, I apologise. Send the medical bills to me. So this one is a sort of semi-fictional livery. I mean, it's not fictional because there was a loco painted in this livery in real life. It is, of course, Alton Hall, but I don't believe it was painted into this lovely maroon livery until Harry Potter came along. But I'll show it anyway. Yes, so I don't know. Great Western Maroon, perhaps? Then we have a livery which isn't necessarily a Great Western livery, but it is a Great Western loco painted into this livery. So this is the khaki livery. It does still have Great Western on the tender, so maybe the khakis were different for other members of the Big Four or the pre-grouping railways, I'm not sure. But either way, that's a bit of a khaki representation there for you. And then sticking quite roughly with the Great Western theme, we'll move on to BR. So we've got... this is probably quite simplified, but I've tried to cut these down a little bit. So we have early BR, as you can see, it's got the early crest on the tender, but it's BR green, obviously, and that one is the British Monarch, so that is the Star class. Sticking with the early BR liveries, we have early BR blue just there, and I don't think I've got a representation of late BR blue. I might have, but that might be one that I missed off. Once again, early BR, getting it wrapped around my head now. We have the 9F, early BR black, and then we have late BR black. There we go. Hopefully that's in focus for you. I might have forgotten to say some of the classes here. That is the Thompson 01, I think it is. Then we have Great Western, no, not Great Western, British Railways black. This time it's lined with the white and red. No crest on the tender this time, it's just got the BR lettering, British Railways. Then we have late BR green. There we go, I'm hoping that's right. Lined green this time, of course. And then coming back, we're starting to get into LMS territory, but we've got the late BR maroon there, which is quite nice. And I think that's it for the BR liveries now, so we'll get on to LMS in earnest. So we have... ooh, what's this one? Well, it's LMS blue, quite obviously. I think there was a special name for it, though, wasn't it? Yes, I forget which one that was. Yes, there is a special name, though, so I'll put that on the screen now once again. I apologise, my memory has failed me. And then we have one that's always confused me. So we've got LMS. Obviously, this is in a crimson, but there's also, you hear the term Crimson Lake thrown around. So is LMS maroon and Crimson Lake one and the same livery, or are they separate? Either way, that's all I've got for that. But yes, there is a possibility that they might be two separate liveries. I'm not 100% sure on that. Then we have LMS black just behind there with the 3F. There we go. That's the Johnson / Dealey 3F there, which is very lovely. And then sticking with the sort of LMS region, we've got some of the pre-grouping and other railways. So we've got Caledonian Blue there, which is a very lovely livery, here represented with the Hattons Barclay, although there are quite a few locos in that livery, or at least in real life. Then we have the Midland Railway Maroon, which is quite lovely there with the Triang 3F, Dealey 3F. The S and DJR Blue, of course, is quite a classic livery, and I believe S and DJR Black existed as well, but I don't have that in my collection. So that's the 2P, obviously. Behind there, we have the LNER Maroon, I think you would call that one. I think, once again, LNER had quite a few different liveries, including quite a lovely black. And then to the right-hand side of that, we have the Webb Coal Tank. Now, once again, my memory's failed me on that. I can't remember which railway that came from. So once again, you'll have to read the subtitle underneath. But yes, once again, that is a different livery. That isn't just an LMS black, as far as I know. That is a special livery on its own, of course, with the shiny, glossy handrails and also the silver trim around the tanks and things, which is very lovely. Okay, so if I come out, we will now get on to LNER Green, and we're going to start with the Flying Scotsman. Now, as you can see, if I get a wide two shot of these, you can see that the shades of green are slightly different. Now, you hear all sorts of different greens tossed around for the LNER. So you've got LNER green, you've got Doncaster green, you've got grass green, there's apple green. I don't really know all the differences because, I mean, just apple green and grass green. Surely apples and grass can be any shade of green you like within reason. So I don't really know exactly, but just to incorporate a couple of the different versions of LNER green, I've used the Scotsmans there, and yes, you can see that they are different. Then we have Garter Blue, which is another classic livery from the LNER, although as far as I know, I might be setting myself up for a fall here, but as far as I know, it is only the A4s that ever used that livery. Could be wrong. If I am, once again, please let me know. And I think the same goes with this one, which I'm just going to call LNER Silver, I guess, for Silver Link. Yes, I'm not aware of any other LNER locos carrying this livery. I think there was a Bullied Pacific in a sort of silverish livery at some point. But yeah, obviously that's not going to be the same livery as this. Or if it is, I stand corrected. But once again, LNER Silver, a very unusual livery indeed. And then just behind the A4s, possibly my favourite livery of them all. I'm sorry that you can't see it all that well. It is, of course, Great Northern Green, represented with the C1 Atlantic. That's the one. Absolutely love that livery. Hopefully you'll be seeing a bit more of that later on. Then we have LNER Black. Once again, there are quite a few different variations of LNER Black. This is a more unusual one, which doesn't have the LNER font. Although, of course, there are LNER Black engines with lining and different fonts and things. So that is a bit of a simplification there. And then finally, we have, sticking with the LNER region, we have the Great Central Green, which once again is quite unusual to me. I think this is the only loco I've got in that livery, but it is very lovely nonetheless. So there we go, we got to the end. That is, I mean, it's not all of them. I'm not going to say it's all, just to be clear. But it is the vast majority of the steam liveries, at least British steam liveries, that I've been able to collect. So there we go. Let me know in the comments what you thought about those, which was your favourite, and just look at this sea of different liveries. It's just incredible how many there are. I'm blown away by how many there are. It's not something I'd ever thought about before. I suppose I ought to try and count. But in the meantime, I'm going to choose 6 locos from this collection, so you never know what you're going to get. It really will be a complete surprise for you, hopefully. And we'll get some of them running, so stay tuned. I'll set some trains up and we'll get started. Alright, so the first one I've picked is one that I don't run very often, and I think that's almost a criminal shame, isn't it? So it is the very, very beautiful Hornby H-Class in my personal favourite livery, which is the SECR Green. And these H-Classes did start life on the SECR when they were first introduced in 1904 to the design of Harry Wainwright. A total of 66 were produced overall, and the class generally worked on branch lines operating push-pull services. The class survived for many years doing work like this, and in 1923, of course, the class became part of the Southern Railway, where they continued to be used. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, though, the locomotives were dated and began to be withdrawn, just like every other locomotive, really, in the wake of the diesels. Now, only one exists in preservation at the moment. It's number SECR number 263. It had the Southern number 1263 and the BR number 31263. So there she goes, the lovely H-Class parading past the rest of the engines, probably laughing at them because they didn't get to run. But okay, let's move on and I will show you the next gorgeous engine. Okay, so we're hearing from the Great Western next. As you can see, a loco that I do like very much. This is the Earl class, or I think they had the nickname Duke Dogs, didn't they? So these were introduced to the Great Western in 1936, so a lot later than they look. They certainly, I think, were deliberately made to look a bit more old-fashioned than they really were. A bit of clever marketing there. To the design, of course, of Charles Collett. They earned the nickname Duke Dogs because they were built using a combination of the old Duke class boilers and the Bulldog class frames, which of course were older, so I suppose that helped to make them look a bit old-fashioned as well. The class performed passenger duties well into the BR era, and some remained in service until the 1950s. In total, 30 were produced, all during the late 1930s, but all but one was scrapped, the remaining example being, I think it had the running number 9017, if I can read my writing right. So, two very lovely engines in two different shades of green. Unfortunately, the Hornby H-Class has stopped dead. The motor has failed in a puff of smoke. And that happens so often. I've heard so many people say that they've had motor problems with their H-Class. And finally, mine has popped as well. So, I can only say, don't buy the Hornby H-Class. They don't last 5 minutes. Absolute rubbish. So, very luckily, I did buy a replacement motor for this a long while ago from China, and I've had it waiting for such a moment. I knew this moment would come. So now I've got the great fun and the great pleasure of having to open it up and try and fit a new motor. I will try it one more time. We'll see what happens now that it's had a chance to cool down, but other than that, not impressed. Oh, that's it. And it's only 3 coaches. 3 coaches shouldn't be killing locos, should it? But yeah, it is dead. Quite dead. Yeah, it's quite warm as well. Bad choice of motor, Hornby. Bad choice. Isn't designed for that sort of thing, I don't think, looking at it. There we are, good as new. New motor running in now. And you won't believe it, but that new motor, 5-pole, 12 to 24 volts, cost me £1, and I wasn't even buying in bulk. So from China, just tells you, doesn't it, how much manufacturers really do pay for these motors. And it also tells you that they're foolish too, because if they spent a decent amount on decent motors, it perhaps wouldn't fail within a year. But never mind. Incidentally, I don't know how long that's going to last, because it doesn't sound very happy, and it's yeah, not that easy to turn the motor once it's in. But we will see. It's working now, so that's something, isn't it? Okay, moving on then. Let's get something on line 3. So, here's another one that I don't run quite often. Once again, quite a shame, because it is very unusual looking. From the LNER, of course, in the LNER Black, and this is a freight locomotive known as the Q6. And these Raven Q6 started life on the North Eastern Railway, the NER, where it was first known as the Class T2. The class was designed by Vincent Raven, a name you don't often hear, I would say, and 120 were built for heavy freight between 1913 and 1921. They were based on the earlier Q5 design, but featured larger boilers and superheaters too. The class proved to be extremely successful this time and survived into LNER ownership from 1923 onwards, and from there the class continued to work through the BR era before finally being withdrawn with all British steam locos really during the 1960s, having worked tirelessly for up to 54 years, so very, very long-serving engines once again. Although so many of them were built though, only one remains in preservation, and that had the LNER number 1946, or I believe the BR number 2238. So there we are, 3 very lovely engines. I'm definitely going to tread carefully with that H-Class. I think even though it seems fine, I'm only going to run it light or with very, very tiny loads in the future, because I've only got one more motor, and once that one's gone, well, if this current motor that's in it now goes, then I really will need to be very careful, because I've only got one more. I might contact Hornby and see if they can send me another motor, but I don't hold much hope, but hey, I'll try, and if they are good enough to actually send me one, which I think they should, because it's not a model that I've owned for years and years. I reckon I've only had it a year or perhaps 2 at the most, and it's certainly not run often, so no, I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect another motor from them, but that still doesn't mean they're going to, but I'll ask. Why not ask? Alright, hello again folks, just a quick addendum, because I did get in touch with Hornby as I said I would, and I have to say the Hornby customer service is leaps and bounds better than it was a couple of years ago when I last got in touch to try and get some spares for a model I'd had problems with. So I got in touch with a chap called Matt at customer service who was very helpful, got straight to the point, and once I'd explained that really I didn't want to be sending the H-Class back to them because, you know, it's such a faff and I've already had the guts out of it anyway, so I sort of know what I'm doing with it. He just said, yeah, we can send you a replacement motor, and this is the next day and it is here ready to put in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wait, I think, until the cheap, slightly dubious motor that I've put in gives out, and when it does, and I'm pretty sure it's going to, I've got the proper replacement now, which is exactly what I wanted, so that I can put it back and get it back into original condition, working condition most importantly. So thank you, Hornby, thank you, thank goodness for that. Okay, cool. Well, I'm just going to do a little crawl test with this H-Class just to prove that the Chinese motors are just as good. Well, I mean, the ones Hornby use are going to be the same thing. That's what I want to prove. Okay, let's do that. Okay, let's just see if it'll crawl. Hopefully it does. Yep, in fact that's probably better than the original motor was actually. Look at that, that's very good. So if Hornby aren't using motors that cost £1, or less than £1 if they're not having to be shipped from China, then they should be doing, because that's fine. I mean, it's not the best in the world, but it's not been running yet. It's still got to run for a bit, but I'll do that in my own time. But yeah, it seems all right, that does. But still, shouldn't have to replace motors. You never got that with Triang. Anyway, moving on then, let's choose a few more engines and get those running. Alright, so when it comes to gorgeous liveries, this one had to be the first pick. In fact, this is the first one that I did pick for this. I thought, yeah, got to have this. So it is, of course, the absolutely gorgeous looking C1 Atlantic from Bachmann. Now, the C1 Atlantic was first introduced to the GNR, which is this livery, of course, the Great Northern, in 1898 to the design of Henry Ivatt, and it was the first Atlantic designed to be completed in the UK, beating the Atlantics of the LNER by a little way, I think. The first 22 examples were built between 1898 and 1903, although they're not what this model depicts. This model depicts those with a larger boiler, and I think the ones built in 1898 at least had the smaller boiler. In 1902, Ivatt introduced a larger version of its C1 design, which I think is this one, and that did incorporate a much larger boiler. The new C1 was far more numerous than the last, with 94 being produced in total. Many of these Atlantics survived beyond the 1948 BR era, and all of them had been withdrawn and scrapped by 1950, with only one survivor, number 251. So, as you can probably easily tell, I absolutely love this one. Absolutely love it. Nice, so I'll leave her running and we'll get the next engine out then. Here it comes. So, here we have the Coronation class then, not the streamlined one, of course. This is the unstreamlined one, but it is obviously the same class as the beautiful streamlined ones I showed. And these were the last Pacifics ever to be designed by William Stanier. They were introduced in 1937, and they were basically very similar, but obviously much larger and overall much more successful than the earlier Princess class. 38 of these were built in total between 1937 and 1948, and they were basically what you would say was the ultimate British passenger locomotive. There were slight variations between different examples, most notably the streamlining, as I've already mentioned. Some had it and some didn't. It was eventually removed after 1946, I think, or that's perhaps the date where they stopped putting it on new ones. But yes, over time, the ones that were built with streamlining did have it removed as well. In total, a reasonably healthy 3 examples have been preserved, and the remainder, sadly, were scrapped. So she is a splendid model. Not the newest, it's getting on for 20 years old now, this particular model, but it still looks the part. The weathering makes it look super realistic, and it just runs like a dream, and it always has. So yes, the unstreamlined Coronation class, what a treat. One more loco to show you then, let's go and see it. So here it comes now then, last but not least, we've got another black livery. This time though we're hearing from the Southern in this beautiful Southern black livery. So this is the S15. The S15 was quite similar to Robert Urey's N15, except it was very slightly smaller, introduced in 1920, and this was intended for night goods trains. So as you can see, it has got a goods train there, which it would probably haul overnights. Following 1923, the locos became part of the Southern Railway fleet, where additional members of the class were produced by Richard Maunsell this time in 1927, and I think this one might be based on one of those. I don't really know if there are many differences between the Urey and the Maunsell version. Possibly not. They did get the same classification, so maybe not, but I'm not absolutely sure. After their modifications, the S15s were said to be excellent performers, and they were perfectly ideal for both passenger and goods services, and I believe they did both over their lifetimes. Of 45 produced, a healthy 7 have been preserved, which isn't too bad. And this example is number 827, built in 1927. She was withdrawn in 1964, but sadly this is not one of those that was preserved. She was cut up and scrapped, having served for almost 40 years. So the S15. And if you'll believe it, my S15 has actually got a cheap Chinese knockoff motor inside it. I bought all sorts. I bought loads of Hornby motors, well, motors that fit Hornby locos rather, from China, very, very cheap, and I fitted them to quite a few locos just to see how they run. In fact, I'll show you this. Look at my box of motors. There we go, a box full of them, all Hornby motors, or rather, sort of Chinese knockoffs of Hornby motors. But I tell you what, they were cheap. Most of them less than £2 each, of loads of the different sorts. These are the sort of 040/Black 5/Henry/ all of that sort of thing motors, but I've got lots of the other types as well. I tell you what, they work fine, and many of my locos have secretly got them in just to test them out, and no problems so far. So don't ever spend more than a couple of quid on Hornby motors, because there are spare sellers that are out to get you. Unless, of course, they do have a flywheel and a worm drive on them and things. That certainly does put the value up. But a motor on its own, a couple of quid at the very most. But yes, that has been a very enjoyable running session, except for the fact that I had to strip an engine down just to get it to finish the video. But aside from that, pretty much enjoyed that, and it is lovely to see so many different liveries out there, isn't it? Again, just amazed at how many there are. So let me know down in the comments which of the engines I showed today was your favourite, and I'll put up a poll of the ones I ran so you can pick your favourite of that as well. Let me know what you thought of the video anyway. Do you enjoy this style of video? Should I do some more? And if you do, and lots of people say so, I will certainly do some more. But for the time being, folks, thank you all very, very much for your company. Thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed that one, and I will see you all very, very soon. All right, cheers, folks. Have a great week.